Ahoy hoy, this is Michaela from Team Retro, where we like retro games and we like the devices that bring them to us. So we're not in the studio today, we're actually out on the kitchen table because the device that we're working with is just too big for me to work on in my office. This is a Lenovo desktop that was about to be thrown out, and I saved it from its ultimate fate. Because even though this is a discontinued desktop, the specs on it are still pretty decent, and I think I can turn it into a fairly good emulation machine. This is a Lenovo ThinkCentre M710S computer. Out of the box, it's running a Core i3 processor and 8GB of RAM, and you can find these computers on eBay for about $120 to $200 depending on the specs that they have. But you can clearly see that this poor computer has seen better days. It looks like it was dropped or banged at one point because this front panel is cracked and it looks like it's being held together by duct tape. It's really unfortunate that this computer was treated so poorly, but even though it's an eyesore, I think we can work with it. So we're going to open this thing up, see what kind of internals we're working with, and see if we can install Recalbox to this unit. And I'm thinking we could probably get some decent GameCube emulation, and we might even be able to get some PS2 out of this device. And while this is sort of a tutorial video, it's not really a review or anything, it's just a nifty little project that I kind of want to try. I've been working more with handhelds and Raspberry Pis and things like that, so I never actually tested a full-fledged PC before. So with that, let's jump in and let's get started. Now, as far as specs go, we're working with an Intel i3 7100 Kaby Lake processor, whatever that means, and it appears to output at 3.90 GHz, and we're also running 8GB DDR4 RAM. The processor is listed as discontinued, but for our purposes, we should be able to get some power out of it. Here's a quick look at the I/O. What's very curious about this is that we have VGA and we have DisplayPort, but we do not have HDMI out, so we'll be using a DisplayPort to HDMI adapter for this video. And we do have a 128GB M.2 drive, but we're actually going to bypass that, and we're going to install a 256 Samsung SSD. I ultimately want to make this a dual boot machine, so I want to keep the Windows drive intact. But we're going to actually set this computer to make Recalbox the primary boot option and Windows the secondary boot option. We're only going to be booting this device in Windows when and if we need to. So the first step was to connect the SSD to my main computer so that we can install Recalbox on it. So from the main website, I'm going to say that I'm building Recalbox on a PC, and you're also going to need the program Raspberry Pi Imager. I already have this program installed. And let's go ahead and boot that up now. So under operating system, we're going to go down to use custom. And in our downloads folder, we're going to choose the x86 image that we just downloaded. And then we're also going to choose the external hard drive that we just connected. So this is the 256GB one that I just chose here. It doesn't tell you the name of the drive, so you have to be careful that you choose the correct drive. And then go ahead and write the image. Now, once this is written, you're going to have to perform an initial boot in order to create the share partition. And I did this off camera, but what I actually did was rebooted my PC and chose to boot into the drive that I had just imaged. And from there, it performed the initial setup and it created the share partition, and then I was able to just restart my computer back into Windows. And from there, I put my ROMs and my BIOS files right into that share partition, the same way that I did when I set up my RetroFlag GPI case. So I'll leave a link in the description to that setup video just in case you need to see how to put the ROMs onto the drive. Alright, now that our ROMs and our BIOS files and our Recalbox operating system is set up on this external drive, let's go ahead and open the computer up and find the best way to mount this drive onto the system. And for a computer that was about to get thrown in the garbage, I was actually really surprised by how clean this setup was. Lenovo actually does a pretty decent job with their desktops. And now that I've opened it up, I could see exactly what happened with this unit. It looks like one of the pins that holds the front case in place was cracked off, probably by dropping or banging into this unit. But it looks like this plastic front cover is the only structural damage. It doesn't look like there's any damage to any parts in the unit. And this section on the right looks like it opens up, so let's just disconnect the CD-ROM drive and pop this right open. One of the downsides of working in the kitchen is my cat Luna loves to stick her nose into everything, so we just gotta nudge her out of the way really quick. And now that we're opened up, we could see the 8 gigabytes of RAM here. It looks like it's only one stick, so I could upgrade this to 16 gigabytes if I ever decided I needed to. And down on the bottom there's our M.2 drive. We're going to leave that intact because we're going to keep this as a dual boot operating system. And if you look on the right, that looks like a bracket to house a secondary hard drive, so I think we just found where we're going to put our Recalbox drive. I just need to figure out how to take this bracket off. I believe it's only held on by one screw. And once I take that screw off, that bracket should just come right out, and we should be able to just mount the drive right from there. So let's go ahead and actually do that now. While messing with this device, I was actually able to get the plastic piece out first. So I just wanted to show you that there are pins on the side of this plastic that just go right into the hard drive, and we don't need to screw anything in place. The hard drive fits really nicely in that bracket, so let's take the metal part off too. Forgive my big ol' head here. I tried to keep my head out of the shot as much as possible, but I didn't always succeed. And the plastic piece with the hard drive just slides right into the metal bracket, and it's as simple as that. Now before we screw this back into place, we're just going to put the plugs in. We have two different plugs that are going to go to two different parts of the motherboard. One of these plugs should pull from the power supply, and the other plug should pull data and read from the drive. So we're just going to plug these into the appropriate places on the motherboard. I apologize, I don't know the technical terms as to what these ports are, but one of them looks like it fits on those red ports, and the other one is square with 4 prongs, so I found another spot that was square with 4 prongs, and I plugged that in as well. My experience with computers is limited, but I believe the 4 prongs is for power from the motherboard, and the part that connected to the red plug is for data. Alright, now that we've got everything plugged in and set up, let me just show you what everything looks like. There's where the hard drive is plugged in for data, and we can go ahead and close this thing up and get it ready. So we'll go ahead and close the lid nice and secure, and we'll put this front piece of plastic back on. I'm going to end up having to reinforce that with some electrical tape, just because I don't want that to be an entryway for dust and debris. So we'll do the best we can. We'll just pull the plastic as tight to the machine as we can, and then just put a layer of electrical tape here where the pin is supposed to be. And we're not touching any wires or anything. We're just going to use the metal of the unit. And I'll do another thin layer of tape along the bottom just to make sure dust doesn't get in there. Alright, and that's probably as good as we're going to get, so let's go ahead and put the lid back on and close this thing up. And then we'll hook it up into a portable monitor for testing purposes and see if we can boot into the BIOS. Here we are powering up. Looks like it does power up with no problem, and we were able to get into the BIOS. So let's go ahead and go into the Startup tab and go into Primary Boot Sequence. And you could see the M.2 drive that has Windows is the primary startup, But we can also see that the Samsung drive that we just mounted is also available. That means that the device is getting power and the computer is recognizing it. So we're going to use the plus and minus keys on the keyboard here to set that Samsung drive to the primary and the M.2 drive as the secondary. And then we'll hit F10 to save and exit. This will save our settings and restart the computer. And if we did everything right, it should go right into Recalbox. And there we go. Everything seems to be running fantastic. We've got our Recalbox intro screen, and we should be getting an Emulation Station front end in a minute here. Alright, we're good to go with testing, so let's go ahead and connect a controller to this, and we're going to switch over to my capture card. Here we are, back in the studio and out of the kitchen, and the first thing you'll notice is that no sound is playing, so you'll have to go into your output device in your sound settings and change it to HDMI/DisplayPort. And once you go ahead and do that, it should automatically start outputting sound to your television or monitor, depending on what you're hooked up to. And this particular computer actually has built-in speakers, so the sound will probably come out of the tower until you change that setting. It actually scared me at first. I didn't expect sound to come out at all until I changed the output. Next step is to go into our controller settings and configure our controller. I have my Big 1 controller plugged in and it's recognizing it as an Xbox 360 controller, so I just want to run through and reprogram all the buttons just so that it recognizes B as A and X as Y. And that's all the setup we should need to do. Let's get into some gameplay. So I unfortunately had limited time to do testing, so I only really tested one Dreamcast game, Sonic Adventure 2, and I did get a couple of stutters here and there, but for the most part, the game played flawlessly, so I imagine most Dreamcast games should run very well on this computer. And again, we're only using an older i3 chipset, but regardless, I'm going to try to push this as far as I can. Looks good so far considering we're only running integrated graphics. There's no extraordinary graphics card at play here. When playtesting Nintendo 64, again with Paper Mario, one of the harder games to emulate, there were some audio stutters and a couple of frame rate dips, but it was not unplayable by any means. However, I did notice that those small stutters actually made it harder for me to... I also noticed that I wasn't making timing on attacks, but that might have been because I just haven't unlocked that feature in the game yet. I don't remember Paper Mario that well. And I wanted to test the standalone emulator versus the RetroArch core. So here's Super Smash Bros. Using the standalone emulator, and I can't configure anything or set bezels or change my controls, but the gameplay does seem pretty smooth. I don't see any graphical issues. Now usually when switching to RetroArch from a standalone emulator on Recalbox, there is a sacrifice in performance. But let's go ahead and give it a shot anyways. Let's switch to RetroArch from the standalone. And I'm not necessarily seeing any dip in performance. The game seems to be running properly. And Smash Bros. Is another one of those games that struggles on lower end systems. But we don't seem to have that struggle here. And we have the preloaded bezels and everything looks really nice. Now let's kick it up another notch to GameCube. Here's Legend of Zelda Wind Waker running on a Dolphin standalone, which is the only option when using Recalbox. And the game seems to be performing really well, and it also looks pretty crisp. The only downside to using the Dolphin emulator is there were no controller shortcuts programmed in. So I couldn't quit out of a GameCube game unless I turned off the computer and turned it back on. There's apparently a way to fix this, I just haven't been able to get into the config file in order to do it. However, the game is running so smooth, I wanted to try changing the aspect ratio, so I went into advanced emulator configuration, and I went into GameCube and I switched the game ratio to 16:9. And I wanted to do that because I wanted to see if the game still looked nice and crisp in a widescreen aspect ratio. And sure enough, I was not disappointed. The game looked really good. And frame rates still seemed to be nice and steady. I was very impressed by this. Here's Mario Kart Double Dash. Again, no issues. And in that 16:9 aspect ratio, the game yet again looks gorgeous. So it looks like this setup is going to play most GameCube games very well. Time for the obligatory God of War footage. Here's God of War Chains of Olympus on PSP at a 4X resolution, and no dice there, so let's go ahead and down this to a 2X resolution. And once we do that, we're fine. It doesn't look as nice as a 4X resolution, but it is functional, so you will be able to play the two God of War games for PSP at a 2X resolution. However, the only hiccup that I had was that at some point, everything just crashed. And it was really weird. It appeared to just be a crash within PPSSPP because I was able to get back into the PPSSPP menu, and I was also able to exit to Emulation Station. It was just a really weird thing, and it only happened once. So once I exited out and went into another game, here's Outrun running at a 4X resolution. This was perfectly fine. I never got that crash again, and most PSP games, with the exception of the God of War games, worked very well at this resolution and looked beautiful. PS2, very much like GameCube, only had a standalone emulator, but we again stretched things out to 16:9 just to see how nice it looked, and Crash Nitro Kart didn't seem to give me any problems. In fact, it actually looked pretty good. Same thing with easier to run games like Alien Hominid. This one didn't give me a hard time either, but then when it came time to try the harder stuff like the God of War game, here's God of War 2, and everything is just sluggish and the audio is stuttering, and this is definitely unplayable. And I didn't try to actually get into any of the settings because I didn't have a keyboard connected, and I couldn't use any controller shortcuts to get into any menus to tweak this. But out of the box, the PlayStation 2 games were kind of hit or miss. Most of the games ran very well. However, the harder to emulate games, such as God of War and God of War 2, just didn't push out the performance that I was expecting. To be fair, if I were working with a better computer, then I would probably get better performance out of this emulator, but working with the i3 and the integrated graphics probably held this system back. And let me end on a positive note. I wasn't expecting very much at all when it came to Wii performance, and I was pleasantly surprised. I didn't test a lot of Wii games just because I don't have a lot of Wii ROMs, but the ones I did test ran flawlessly. And I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting performance issues like what I experienced with PlayStation 2, but this computer held its own very well as an emulation device, and for a pet project that I had started just to save an old computer from getting thrown away, this has been actually a great experience. And that'll do it for this video. This wasn't necessarily a video on anything that I was reviewing or that I intended to give a tutorial on, but I saw that they were throwing this computer away and I really wanted to see if I could make it something good, and I think I did. And you can probably do this with any device that you need to recycle or dispose of. You can turn it into a Recalbox emulation machine with varying levels of performance. Let me know if you have any thoughts or questions in the comments below, and please feel free to continue the conversation in the Budget Aquaman Discord. Link will be in the description. Again, thank you so much for watching, and if this video was helpful to you in any way, please be sure to like and subscribe. Until next time, bye for now, and don't stop believing.